Recording. Hi, everybody. I'm Grace Stern. I am Virginia Cooperative Extension's State EMG Coordinator. Today with us, we have our volunteer manager for Hanover Master Gardeners in Hanover County, as well as the Extension Agent for Agriculture and Natural Resources in Hanover County, Angelette Pryor and Scott Ferguson, presenting on wildlife conflicts, ecology, and management. This is a topic that a lot of EMGs end up answering through helpline calls. And we are just starting to include a little bit more information and programming on this. And if you're also a master naturalist, some of this might be a little bit more familiar. Or if you're in one of those suburban, exurban areas where we tend to have a lot of wildlife conflicts, or you have as my case, when I was a Nelson County agent, you have a urban and suburban population moving to a rural area that's not accustomed to dealing with wildlife. So I'm really looking forward to this. I think this is going to give us all a lot of good skills and information to deal with the things that we do in our master gardenering. With that, Scott and Angelette are going to present for us.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Grace. And yeah, I think you teed it up pretty well. Kind of the situation that we have in a urbanizing county like Hanover County. So I'm the ag agent in Hanover County. I've been here for about a year. My background's in horticulture. My degree is actually in natural resources. So, like a lot of agents that come to VCE, we kind of have a lot of different experiences and background. And then Angelette Pryor is our volunteer coordinator, and she is kind of on the ground working with a lot of these conflicts too, not only in the county, but then also their property too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some pieces of the ecology of the conflict. Kind of trying to think about how we can educate the public and understand what they need. And then Angelette's going to talk more about kind of the role of the master gardener and about the educating the public as we go forward. So the objectives here, on my side is just to get to be able to think about these urban and suburban environments as being an ecological habitat and what that means for these types of conflicts. Some of the expectations of homeowners about wildlife, whether you're moving to a new area or experiencing change in the wildlife onto your property. Some of the barriers to management, just whether those be social or other challenges, and then kind of what it means in the community to address these types of challenges for a community or a county. Some methods and legal control, just kind of going over the basics there. And then really just thinking about the VCE agency, our partners, if you will, if we're working with wildlife people. We actually share a office here with animal protection services too. So just thinking about those partners and the way the role is always divided up, us being an educational institution and working with our partners. So first thinking about, the ecology in these suburban and urban habitats, and whether it's a land that has been developed or changed or is quite rural, or something like in this image that you see here, where we have, a new development kind of starting from scratch, if you will. We really need to think about the urban and suburban environment as being, highly modified from an initial state where you have many trophic levels of insects, birds, wildlife, human interaction at a different scale, and what that means. And so, when we build these types of places, or again, in even some of the rural areas, there's, often complete removal of vegetation, soil, and they have down trophic levels into our processes. And of course, with that, there's a change in the food web. But over time with people's plantings, if you're doing even native plantings or different things like that, we're still coming to a new steady state that has some of the wildlife that was possibly there before, some new wildlife, and then of course some that just are not in there. So just thinking about whatever environment that we're living in is an ecological habitat for different wildlife. And thinking about that here too, we put in an example like this where we have, a lake that's highly managed, a lawn, and some other plantings. but really, does the homeowner here really want any wildlife? Like, is there any type of wildlife that can kind of coexist in this for this type of a highly urban situation? And that's kind of a question for us all, as well as for for our clientele. And again, changes to an environment. Here we have an image of kind of a exurban or semi-rural, but again, a highly modified environment in which some desirable trees are being grown, and obviously they need to be caged, probably for deer. But these changes to the ecology of this space are going to benefit some species, right? There's going to be decreased predation, if there's not birds of prey or other, higher trophic level predators there. Often the resource has availability at the lower trophic levels of the overall, nitrogen and nutrient cycling, whether that be from fertilization or, our pets, our activity being there to kind of make it a desirable place for certain wildlife to exist. And of course, it's harmful to others. We often see, a decrease in overall biodiversity in these types of spaces. And there can be, a lower number of host species or complexity of the environment that allows, certain animals to hide or reproduce, right? So there might be less or different types of, nesting locations or the safety there too. And again, every animal must go somewhere, but they can't all live everywhere. So again, there's going to be some winners and some losers there. And then on the human interaction with this type of complex, it's really the common conflicts we see are kind of at the very end, right? After an ecological system has established and people are interacting with the wildlife on their property, usually kind of comes to like solution oriented things like, okay, I have damage to my garden, certainly increased vehicle collisions. There's some suggestions in some of the complexes where there might be sprayer disease, whether that's Lyme, hantavirus, just other unsightliness of animal activity. And so these are really the kind of the common conflicts that we usually end up getting as far as the request from the homeowner to, for example, a helpline or to our offices. And really, there are some challenges of very overabundant populations. And you look at this image here and think, oh, he threw a curveball. He went on AI and generated this image of these wild horses. This is not an AI generated image. This is an image that I took. I'm originally from Nevada. This is at the foothills of Virginia City, a historic city, and these are wild horses that were released into the environment many years ago. Horses are not native to North America. And this kind of, they're large and they're obvious here, but it really is kind of the same type of conflict we have with some of our other, typical wildlife conflicts in the state of Virginia, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, in that some people really really love these. They think it's part of the American West. They think they should be protected. They think they should be not controlled. And other people see that this species is causing problems not only in urban and suburban environments, but decreasing forage quality on the rangelands there. So thinking about it being part of this species here is benefiting from the water, the nutrients, the forage that is provided by this urban habitat, but pretty much nobody really wants them there. And at this point, management and control is so unsightly to the general public that it's quite a barrier there too. But whatever we do, again, we get a lot of calls where it's like, hey, how do I control X, Y, and Z? And we'll go into some of that too. But I would just encourage all the people working with the public to, try to get the client to have a meaningful understanding of the ecosystem and the ecology of their environment in order to make an informed decision, right? The wildlife is looking for a place to live, and for some reason or a combination of reasons, it's chosen, your land or your client's land. And, understand the ecology can help some of the IPM strategies if you do want to control it, or at least, understanding of why that conflict has arisen there too. And then again, sometimes we, want wildlife. We attempt to increase, desired species. It's very common for people to do, bird feeders. There are some people that will feed the deer. There are some people that will feed the bear. But, thinking about it being an ecological system, not only do you have unintended consequences, through, benefiting other species kind of directly in this case, with this type of, rodent eating the seed, but then also, increasing the overall carrying capacity of that ecological system, through distribution of nutrients into that system too. And really, as far as people wanting to manage wildlife, oftentimes there's unrealistic expectations that, for whatever reason, our control methods aren't working, or that, as we saw before, that there should be, a pristine, wildlife-free zone in your property, except for, the desired songbirds and maybe like a woodpecker every once in a while because you like them. But really, this modification, it's in some cases causing undesired species to thrive, right? There's also safety concerns if we're going to do any sort of control measure. Certainly, as we looked at with the wild horse example, there's conflicting social attitudes towards those wildlife. Again, a lot of people, see historical value or ecological value of species that others find just to be an absolute nuisance. Certainly restrictions on hunting, firearm usage, especially in urban, suburban environments, as well as tag limits, et cetera. And then other things with, people just being not comfortable with doing that type of control. We can certainly help them with a resource that would allow them to, if desired, to take an animal or to control it mechanically. However, not only will that really solve probably the issue with returning wildlife, but also, people are generally just not super comfortable with that, and that's part of the values that they need to understand and educate and understand what they want out of their property and what that type of system should be managed to be. And then again, across the community, really consensus is really rare. There's a lot of people who have grown up hunting, see, white-tailed deer as a resource, and something that's really pretty. They might even think it's like a Bambi. So for example, you have somebody feeding it, drawing them onto their property, and that is, kind of offensive to other people who have had a lot of conflict with them on the roadways or with eating crops and damaging ornamental plants. Um, you know, our role again is public education and kind of facilitating those conversations about what is the appropriate kind of level of management. Certainly our partners in wildlife management and ecology do a lot of work on large scale control strategies when employed. It's not employed a whole lot in Virginia, but at least understanding population dynamics and things like that. But then, of course, you just kind of have the other end where this is acceptable too on the other end, right? Somebody, eliminating a pest with a firearm, in a legal sense from their house. So just thinking about, the different community views of some of the wildlife issues. Kind of switching gears a little bit here. We'll talk about wildlife control methods, and then, especially in, across the board in extension, as well as, in pest management and agricultural pest management. We always talk about IPM, and while a little bit different in invertebrate management, just as far as the tactics used, it still is a great framework to understand if people want to control pests. And so, that's really what this is in this sense. It's integrated pest management. In this case, it would be integrated, vertebrate pest management. But it's really, again, thinking about the ecology of kind of things I'd already mentioned, but then also looking into using some control strategies to either deter or to control these types of wildlife. In basic, we want to monitor, so we need to know, exactly what that animal is, not only from a legal sense, but then also from a control sense. Kind of your threshold levels, is this a problem? Is it a problem to have one vole? Is it a problem to have 100 voles? And then basically, run through and do a control strategy, evaluate if it works, and then repeat if needed, or change strategy also if needed. So for wildlife control, a cultural control is really kind of a habitat modification, behavior alteration, or in legal cases, relocation that is really not legal in any sense on the homeowner end at this point. So really thinking about things in the ecological environment that we can decrease the kind of palatability, if you will, of the environment in which they're trying to exist. Mechanical control is trapping, hunting, et cetera. Exclusion, fencing would be considered a mechanical control too. Chemical control, I'll talk a little bit about. We really discourage it. Mostly, I'll talk a little bit later, but those type of pesticides can become in the environment and go up trophic levels and have a lot of unintended consequences. But it is possible not only through chemical means to kill an animal, but then also to prevent its reproduction. And then biological control. This really isn't used much as far as like releasing diseases or doing something like that in vertebrate pest control, but certainly at least understanding what the predators are and possibly encourage them, especially if you're working on a complex that has for example birds of prey, where you're making that environment so that they can access it. I'll just go through this real quick too. Cultural control, it's basically, eliminating any food for the animals that they might get into, garbage, pet or livestock feed, kind of basics as far as compost, not putting those highly desirable meats and cheeses in there. And then, some other fencing and screening to keep the animals outside of your desired areas, whether that be a livestock area or into the home or other parts of desired ornamental plantings, for example. And then it's possible too to choose some plantings that are unpalatable to browsers, as we've seen with some of the animals that kind of Angelette will get into. I mean, some will chew on just about anything, but it's at least selecting stuff that might be better off to not be super palatable to them. Mechanical control, just basics here, for hunting and trapping on your own property, outside of other regulations, whether it's discharge of firearms, limits, bagging, et cetera. It's generally considered legal to do for game animals that have become a problem. There's some examples here too. But again, we still want to encourage people not only to be safe and legal on these, but also, think, are we just killing animals and not, kind of addressing some of those other issues in the cultural sense that we could prevent, reestablishment or, different things, or, also, I haven't said it yet, but educating people on, hey, maybe it's okay to have some wildlife. Maybe it's a good thing to have some wildlife on your property too, even though there's maybe not a pristine dreamscape that you were hoping for. Other legals here too. Most songbirds, all raptors and reptiles, you cannot kill or move. That's a big one too. You can't trap and move. We call it relocation, mostly because it's possible to spread disease or just become, a problem in another location. But this is critical too. Unfortunately, again, with a lot of people, especially with snakes, these are protected from control. So, be really careful about what's going on there, and you can work with other companies to help you out there. And then generally, fencing alone isn't enough. I think fencing around something that's highly desirable, palatable, or something that animals are trying to get into, they're eventually going to get through the fence. So thinking about combining it with some other methods, deterrence, etc. And of course, there's frightening devices. We have some that we'll show you in a little bit later here. Just really quick on chemical control of especially rodenticides. Really, we're concerned with it. Jim Parkhurst has done a lot of work on it. VTPP, the pesticide program at Tech, has done quite a bit of work on it too. We're overall concerned mostly because of kind of the inappropriate use, right? Off-label use or use that it gets into other trophic levels of predators. They don't break down super fast in the body of the rodent, the target animal, and can be consumed, and it can move up trophic levels into some other predators and bioaccumulate. And we've seen this in quite a few other trophic levels. I'll show just an image here too of kind of conceptually how this can go. So of course, even through our target rodents, or a non-target animal that is consumed that pesticide, going up into non-target birds of prey, for example, higher trophic levels, but then also inappropriate use or non-target use can get into the environment in other ways too. So in generally, we don't suggest this. They can be purchased at some of your big box stores. It's possible to get these into certain people's hands. So just give caution. I know that we're not giving this type of information out on the help desk, but just give caution and educating the public that we want to be really careful with these. And there are other suggestions too. For example, if you do use it, to make sure that the carcass of the animal is not available to go up and be consumed by other animals too. And then just the last thing here, and really Angelette will get into it a lot, is kind of our role in this whole thing too. I think our role is a lot in the education, the understanding of ecology as we protect we improve agricultural profitability, sustainability, but then also protect our natural resources. And certainly people often call and say, hey, how do I control squirrels? Right? The squirrels are in my car. How do I control it? I think it's worth having a conversation that's a little bit deeper than that, as you get more information and think, well, what's really at conflict here, and then also working through understanding if they're ability to control this or do what they think they want to do is really kind of the right steps. But we can certainly educate about the habitat, suggest some modifications to the environment, even the things I mentioned here, securing trash or other compostables, and then just kind of making realistic goals. Like I do it in my house too. I want the birds, but I sometimes I don't really have a problem if there's other animals too. I really like it. So we educate the public and about options and expectation. So if you have questions, we'll do them all at the end unless there's anything pressing. And then Angelette is going to do a little bit on kind of the Master Gardener helplines and then some other resources on how to help the public as well. So I'm going to stop share and she's going to share.
So forgive me a second. I want to say a special thanks to Rachel and to Quinn. They helped us put this presentation together originally for Master Gardener College. They weren't able to participate today, and we thank them very much. A little background on me. I was born and raised in Lee County, as far southwest as you can go in Virginia. I currently live in Hanover County. I have about 4 acres that's being encroached upon by lots of development. And my husband and I own a 300-acre farm in King George where I have lots of wildlife conflicts. I became a master gardener in 2017. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the questions you may be getting at your Master Gardener Help Desk. A lot of these questions should probably be referred to the Wildlife Conflict Hotline, which we will also talk about in a moment. And then we're going to talk about some specifics about what at least our group considered the most wanted, which are deer, gray squirrels, moles, and voles. So, I have a love-hate relationship with deer. I'll be the first to say that. Beautiful to watch, love those brown eyes and long eyelashes. However, when they start eating my hostas and pulling my dahlias out, I'm not so excited about them. So when we talk to people at the help desk or when we're out in public and we're asked about these nuisance wildlife, we need to do some education about appropriate resources. So Scott talked a little bit about we're changing the whole ecology of everything. You know, when you think back to the picture he showed with the fruit trees and the cages around them, and it was a manicured lawn, then it was some grass, then it was some woodlands. Prime, tasty location for a deer. They love the edge. It's like ringing a dinner bell. They want to come in and look. So that's an education moment. We also need to remind ourselves that we are not experts at everything. There are times when we need to refer people to Department of Wildlife Conservation. We might need to refer them to animal protection. We might need to refer them to the health department. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Master gardeners don't necessarily teach the public how to trap and dispatch wildlife. And we constantly need to remind people it's always illegal to relocate. And part of the reason why it's illegal to locate is that animal more than likely is not going to survive when they're relocated. They were used to the environment where they were. You're picking it up, taking it 10 miles away, dropping it off somewhere else. It doesn't know where its food source is. It doesn't know where its shelter is. It's all of a sudden alone, missing from its pack. And as Scott talked about, we do not tell them how to bait wildlife or how to poison wildlife. So if you want to get rid of that wild animal, now if they're calling and asking this question, I would recommend the first thing you tell them is to call the Virginia Wildlife Conflict Hotline. That's 855-571-9003. They are the experts in how to get rid of this wild animal. Now, if they want to rescue, quote, help this wild animal, maybe they have perceived it is wounded. You noticed I said perceived because sometimes the animal is acting wounded when really it isn't. We should refer them to a licensed wildlife rehabilitation expert. And you can get a listing of those that are available within your zip code if you go to DWR, Department of Wildlife Resources. Great, great resource for folks. Maybe you want to figure out how to get rid of those feral cats that are pesty and in your barn and all over the place. So I would recommend you get very cozy with your animal protection unit. As Scott mentioned, we share an office with our animal protection unit. And I had a fascinating conversation before we put this presentation together with the chief of operations there. Guess who they refer most of their calls to? DWR, Wildlife Conflict. So again, they are the experts. He offered some interesting little factoids for me that I want to go over a little bit. most county health departments can service a resource, but they aren't going to come out and pull something out of your house. So depending on your county, you may need to contact different people. And that might be an animal control thing. If you, heaven forbid, hit a deer one night driving home, you might call the state police, you might call animal protection, but it's the Department of Transportation that's going to drag that animal off and deal with it. So get to know those sorts of resources based on your county, because they're different in each county. Now, if you are observing an animal that you think may have rabies, you need to call 911. That is more of an emergency situation, as well as an animal is acting very aggressive to you. I pass by Hanover Courthouse on my way to work each day, and one morning when I drove by the courthouse, there was a raccoon in the front lawn of the library, and an animal control person about 20 feet away in a standoff. I wasn't really sure what was going on there, but the raccoon was up on 2 feet, paws up, and it did not look very friendly. So I am imagining that that officer was calling for some assistance of animal control. If that animal happens to be in your home, again, heaven forbid, you might want to be calling your animal control or animal protection department also. But if you have been attacked by the animal, then it becomes a medical issue. You need to call 911 and get yourself some help. I hope everyone on this call is familiar with the Virginia Wildlife Conflict Hotline. We've talked about this a lot. We'll continue to talk about it. But if you go to their website, you can get very detailed information about conflict and how to mitigate it by animal name. So, we've got woodpeckers over here to the side. We've got, beavers, bears, deer, and elk. Again, we can't be the experts in everything. DWR is the experts in wildlife issues. Use them, please. So, if it's an emergency, call 911. If it's not an emergency, we should be consulting the current pest management guide, because remember, that's the only thing we can give information from when it comes to integrated pest management. Are these pests? Yes. So look in that current PMG. Refer them to the hotline. Look for other publications. And I would also remind you to look at other state extension websites. A deer is a deer is a deer. Now, there might be different issues, whether that deer is in Colorado or whether it's in Virginia, but some of the information is going to be the same. I would also recommend you talk to your neighbors, or you tell the client to talk to their neighbors. If they're being overrun by squirrel, is their next door neighbor feeding them? That may be a conversation to have across the backyard fence. And at what point does this become an issue? Is 2 squirrels okay? Is 30 squirrels too much? You need to find where that balance is. So let's segue to these, what we called our landscape's most wanted. So the deer is always eating landscape plants, and the deer do cause a lot of traffic accidents. So I was in the car with my adult son. We're flying down the road in his pickup truck when he slammed on the brakes, and it felt like whiplash. There were 2 deer in front of us in the road. They never looked up. They didn't hurry. They very weirdly kept their head down and walked across the road. That is not normal deer behavior. Those deer probably had chronic wasting disease. it was fascinating to watch these deer not be in a hurry and not be frightened of us at all. The eastern gray squirrels, you know, they always come to the bird feeder, but we did put the bird feeder out there, remember. They like to dig in the yard. Sometimes they'll get into your attic, which can be a real pain. We'll talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about vole, V-O-L-E, voles, V for vegetable. They eat landscape plants. They like to dig around in your mulch. And a face only a mother could love, the eastern mole, M-O-L-E, they are carnivores. They eat insects, grubs, etc. So in my Hanover property, it is not uncommon for there to be 5 or 6 deer in the driveway when I come home at night. To the point, I don't plant anything new at my property in Hanover anymore because I feel like my yard has become the wildlife sanctuary. Because the area surrounding me is being developed, they don't have anywhere else to go. I also have water, a stream on my property. So there are always deer, there are always foxes. They aren't creating a lot of angst for me. One thing I would say about deer is if you plan to put a fence up, fence that area first before you plant something, because you never want to let them get a taste of what you have. And I'll talk more about that. There are a lot of people that feed deer. They like to see them. Again, have that discussion with your neighbor. What do deer like? They like high quality food. All those ornamental plants and grasses that you spent so much time tending, so much time fertilizing, so much time, again, it's like ringing a dinner bell. You will find list after list of supposedly deer-proof plants, but I'm willing to say if deer get hungry enough, they'll eat just about anything. So I'm a little skeptical when I see a list of deer proof. There are some plants that are more deer resistant than others. Deer love daylilies and hostas. And you know what? They love that arborvitae too. I have probably 70-year-old boxwoods at my house in King George. I've never known the deer to eat them. They even bed down them in the winter when it's really windy. Think about what a great windbreak that is. Things that deer don't like. Fishing line strung about 2 to 3 feet from the ground. Why is that? They bump against it and they can't quite figure out what it is. So if you're going to do that fence, make sure it's a tall fence. 8 feet or more. Sometimes a double layer. We have plastic deer fencing. I'll show you that in just a second. There is a lot of research going on about a line of wire fence and then another one at an angle to it that people swear by. The only problem is it's very expensive. I've never known the deer to eat on my fig trees or on the rosemary or anything that's really thorny, although they will scrape on something thorny to get the velvet off their antlers. They love to scrape on the locust, the young locust trees at my house. This little device became my best friend this summer. I call this Wiggle Man. So this is at my Kings George property. Here's the 8-foot deer fence. And you notice it looks a little missing right here? Yeah, because we had so much rain this summer that the wood rack fell over and wiped out the fence. So if you have a fence, it's just like having a livestock fence. You're always replacing it. This fence is on these posts with zip ties. Over to the right, where there is a fig tree and a cherry tree and an apple tree, there are 3 layers of the deer fence because they keep hitting it. I would recommend if you put up one of these that you do not pull it really taut, because if you do, the first time the deer hit it, it's broken. If you have a little bit of wiggle to it, it might survive, but you're always working on things. So this is what I call wiggle man. So Scott and I were talking to a producer one day in the office, and he said he tried this scare tactic in his yard and it worked very well for him. I move it about every 2.5 weeks. It's noisy. It has a fan down here. I've also found the groundhogs don't seem to like it because I don't think they like the sound of the fan. It's worked well for me. Let's talk a little bit about eastern gray squirrels. Remember, they're really good jumpers. They can jump vertically 4 feet, which is just amazing. You've seen these squirrel videos where they're jumping up on the bird feeder, and they put oil on the bird feeder or something slick, and they're just craziness. Squirrels are very resourceful. There are some squirrels that are more social than others, and you can observe this, that they're always out in the yard with 1 or 2 of their buddies. And then there's always the lone squirrel that's over there just hastily hiding things. Remember, squirrels are doing us a great service also. They're very good at dispersing seeds. They aerate your soil, as strange as that sounds, but it's true. I had a hard time with this research-based suggestion that if you're having problems with squirrels at your bird feeder, to put their own corn feeder away from where you have the other one. So hopefully they'll go over there. I'm a little skeptical, but that is a research-based suggestion. Try to keep your branches trimmed back because they can make those incredible leaps. And again, talk to your neighbor and make sure they aren't feeding them while you're trying to get rid of them. Squirrels do not like some aromatics. They don't like strong odors, peppermints, vinegar, things like that. I do not have a squirrel problem at either of my houses because I have a lot of hawks and a lot of owls. So another predator are foxes, coyotes, and snakes. That freaks some people out. Snakes can be a very good rodent deterrent, and that's basically what the squirrel is. If you're going to try to, quote, fence them out with something mesh, just make sure it has a very small diameter screening, but they, excuse me, because they can be so flexible. Now, a vole, V-O-L-E, a vole eats, I just remember it as a vegetable. It eats plants. It travels through grass and through mulch piles, and it likes plant material. It is not eating the grubs and so. So they like it when your grass is really tall or when your mulch is really fluffy and you've just put it down and it's really thick, because they can hide in that. They also disperse a lot of seeds for us. You think about all those clover and dandelion, and they're running all around dropping those little seeds everywhere. What they don't like is when you have a very manicured lawn, because that makes them more vulnerable. And when you don't have that mulch volcano stacked up against your tree that's a foot high, which you shouldn't have on there anyway. Low mulch around landscape plants, less than 2 inches, you will tend not to have as many vole problems. Now, I have to say it's a face only a mother could love. I mean, look at that. Moles do not eat plants. They eat grubs, insects, earthworms. They eat a lot of things that make your soil healthy. And they do aerate your soil, which, you know, for something that's pesty, there's always the good and the bad. But they eat a lot of earthworms and grubs. Now, there was a time when the prevailing thought was to put milky spore down for your moles. That is no longer recommended. Because there's so many other things that they're going to eat in there that basically you're just wasting your money. Remember, their predators are foxes and snakes. And this vibration concept does not, research-wise, seem to work for moles. It's hard to get rid of moles and voles. So I'm going to stop yammering for a minute, but I want to recommend a resource. If you want to learn more about deer and getting rid of deer and deterring deer, I would really recommend this resource, Understanding Buck Movement. How, when, and why bucks navigate the landscape. I found this fascinating. Basically, deer travel within a 2 to 3 mile radius. Pretty much they travel the same pathway. They're very predictable. Squirrels are also pretty predictable too. Remember those social ones and the non-social ones. And there's also one of these resources, Strategies to Minimize Deer Damage on School Grounds, has a listing of what they call deer tolerant plants and trees. You notice it doesn't say deer proof, deer tolerant plants. Very good resource, very good resource. So I'm going to stop sharing a moment, and we're going to ask Grace what sorts of questions are coming in, and then we will try to answer those in the 7 minutes that we have left.
Yeah, we're good on time, and I really like the way you guys went through that presentation and included some really important ecology things. Please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. It seems like we were doing a really good job listening, and we didn't get tons of questions while you were speaking, but I'll go through some of those now, and then a few more will trickle in. I wanted to hear about some of your most wanted list or things that we generally have issues with in the Commonwealth. My most wanted list would be different in the western part of the state, and it seems like that's the case for some other people. The two pests that I saw the most comments about, groundhogs, and I can't tell you what I would do with them on my private property. And we had huge issues when I was a vegetable producer. And we do have issues in the orchards. I put in the chat, they do climb peach trees. I have seen them at head level in peach trees.
Yes.
One of the orchards on the mountainside, the grower called it the Taj Mahal of groundhogs because it was huge colonies. So groundhogs, and then snapping turtles. Snapping turtles are things that I've seen a lot of people are prone to try to relocate because they are either unable or unwilling to dispatch them themselves. And so maybe talk a little bit about groundhogs, and then also why we should not relocate snapping turtles. Because there are lots of good reasons not to do that. And one of them is like keeping your fingers. I
can take the groundhog one, but I have nothing on the turtle one. I'd have to get back with you on that.
That's fine.
my property in King George is also run over with groundhogs, and it's 30 years of groundhogs, so you can imagine. I probably can't tell you what I do on my personal property in King George either, but I can tell you that groundhogs love watermelon, and that has been very helpful to me in what I have used this summer to get rid of the ones I have. Is that couched enough?
That's good. I would say what we had, they like to eat all of our produce. And we were unwilling to spend the time to try to dispatch them ourselves. We did have the proper permits and everything. And we used very large have-a-heart traps. And then to make sure we didn't feel good doing any kind of kill traps, especially when you can catch something we don't want to catch and have some really bad effects on beneficials or like somebody's cat. And so and then dispatch them afterwards. They can eat a ridiculous amount of produce.
Yes.
And they have we were on a mountainside. There's some issues with water and water flow from their colonies. So we had a lot of issues with those. I would second calling DWR and asking for help and advice from them. Snapping turtles, I'll look some stuff up.
Yeah, I have to look.
Yeah, those are so broadly, reptiles, even though reptile is not a phylogenetic term, they're you can't kill them. They're protected. So and again, I think a lot of people have their own list. I think I kind of see it as similar to weed control, right? A weed is a plant out of place, and really thinking about all of these issues being, an animal out of place for what we want, especially when we're talking about things like skunks. I mean, skunks are super offensive if you're sprayed, but they're very important in the natural environment. I mean, very important. So yeah, I think we'll, probably not go into a lot of like particular control strategies, but for any of them, I don't think it's like really prudent to do that right now. A lot of because the particular county or the situation needs to be addressed. But yeah, Canadian geese too. And that's kind of the thing, is that it's just really really a lot of stuff to go through. I would say that, going back to the idea of integrated pest management, as we looked at, for example, from, not only conceptually from what I talked about, but Angelette's example with the Wiggle Man. In that case, we were doing, multiple rounds of mechanical control, some scare tactics, different things, but prevention. She even, understood at least what was the palatable species, putting the fence up before the palatable species went in there. Just so, kind of trying to make a plan as far as what people are looking to achieve. And then, having the conversation within themselves or with their community whether or not that's a reasonable thing to try to achieve. Certainly other things here I'm seeing coming in, get a dog, certainly cats. It would be great. But again, your ecology, you're like, I'm going to get a cat to take care of the voles. That's fine. The next thing you know, it killed a bunch of songbirds. So everything is connected here too.
I'd say not rely on one tactic too, multiple tactics.
Yeah, I would say that
That's probably what has saved me the most for the deer population in King George. We have an 8-foot deer fence. We have our property rented to a family of deer hunters. We have a damage permit available because they were eating so much. So it's multiple, and we use Wiggle Man.
Yeah, I would say that integrated pest management strategy of multiple approaches to deal with your problem applies to this vertebrate pest control conversation. I will link a bunch of stuff in the show notes for this. When you go back to the webinar archive and review, there are some things that you should go back and read. I think something we might need to define or explain a little bit more is what we mean by relocate. And like, does relocating on your own property, is that okay? Um, and I guess on top of that, there's probably a caveat with like how big is your own property and what are the risks that you take with that. I know for most of the people that are calling helplines and most of the calls that I got for wildlife issues, that relocating on the own property would not have solved the problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we need to consider what's actually going to solve a problem for the caller or for the client, or for ourselves. And moving it on your own property is not going to kind
No,
of.
and I mean, generally when we're talking about relocation, I mean, for what is people, it's moving an animal. Generally, what people do, and it's not legal, is, to trap it on your own property, and then they don't want to kill the animal, so they have a heart trap or some sort of a live trap. Then go down the road. A lot of people will release stuff in a very inappropriate location, just in a park or whatever. That is completely illegal. That is not suggested here, and we're not doing that. For a lot of reasons. And so that's what it is. I mean, I think that, you know, and that really gets into even having to have a heart traps at all. Like, if you have a heart trap, there's only one option. You have to kill that animal anyways. And you might be able to do it in a more humane sense, but moving it, unless you have a big acreage, and it is, I'd have to look at the regulation. It's legal to move it, to the back 40 or something. I'm not really sure. But I feel like it's kind of just delaying the issue. But at least it's not using, chemical control for these. You know, I worked in horticulture. We trap stuff all the time, and we did not relocate. That makes sense.
Would recommend if you make the choice to trap with have a heart trap and you have skunks in your area, it would be very wise to put a string on that trap so you can open it from a distance. Otherwise, you will not have a very happy day when you catch something you did not want to catch.
I would say have the string on there even if you don't know you have skunks in the area. Just as
You never know
that's
what's going to go in that trap.
that's a mistake that you don't want to make the first time, because they will absolutely spray you. So I will also add, I'll link some really great books, and I have them on the CE list as well for the state. There's a wonderful book called Nature Wars, that investigates a lot of different pest species in the suburban environment. And by pests, I'm talking about the same things: deer, Canadian geese, Canada geese, and why they're issues and why they're protected, and things that I didn't fully understand were issues until I read through the book with lots of good resources. It's about 12 or 14 years old, and the author is no longer presenting or touring. So we could not get him to speak for us, but that's a really good one. It's called Nature Wars. Deer Proofing Your Yard and Garden is another one. It's blending in Angelette. And there's a really interesting book, especially for all of you that are wildlife lovers. There's a really cool book called Suburban Safari, which is written by a travel writer who decided to take a year at home and study what's going on in her backyard. And there's lots of other good information in there as well. And that one comes to mind specifically for relocation. And based on I'll tell a story from the time I was an agent. There was a client who called my office, because she had mice in her house, lots of mice in her house, and she did not want to kill them. She said she was setting traps, and I assumed, like any normal agriculture agent, that they were not have a heart traps for house mice. And they were. And the population boomed inside her home. And she said she was relocating them, taking them in their little traps to the end of her driveway and letting them go. And what were they doing? They're coming right back, right? And so I pulled, I'll have to find it again. I pulled an article based on one of the things I read from Suburban Safari. I think it's Connecticut or Maine, and I will double check and put the link in there. Mice come back. They have a really, and lots of animals do, have a really interesting, like geospatial, mapping. Pigeons do too, ability to find their way back home. The longest that they tested, that this research study tested with mice was, 5 miles, including a river crossing to get back to their original nest. And a smaller percentage made it back than like the 1 mile, half a mile, and it took them longer. Predators and little legs, but they came back. And I was explaining to this client that this was not going to reduce the populations in her house, and that also, like, she's like, should I be concerned about anything in the house? About, having these animals in the house with me. And I was like, yes, yes, this is a health issue. If you have enough that they can see you during the daytime and they're not afraid of you when they see you, you have a lot, right? And so you might get calls to the helpline, inquiries that make you go, oh my goodness, this is a problem. If you can't handle the call, the DWR helpline is good. And just remember that everybody has a slightly different perception of wildlife. And
Yeah.
I would never have considered have a heart trapping mice in my home, but some people do. So I'll link some of those books. There are other good sources. The question that came up in the chat, I can't remember the exact answer, Scott and Angela, you might know. Licensed wildlife companies, pest control companies, can they ever get permission to relocate species?
No, it's
No.
and it might be, we might just be missing each other here on the verbiage. When we're talking about relocating, that's like if somebody would live trap something wherever on their property and then take it live and move it to another place in the attempt to not have to terminate that animal and have it go somewhere else. That's kind of the problem that's been legislated against. Is it could be a problem there, it could move disease. It's just not allowed at all. I mean, there are, I believe if you call like one of the agencies, they might be able to do it on the government level. But to be clear, if you call for a wildlife removal company to remove a wildlife from your property, it's not good. They're gonna terminate that animal. And again, that's where it kind of it's challenging. It's tough. I know it pulls at people's heartstrings. Um,
It's,
but
but
that's how it
yeah,
is. That's
I
how it
mean,
is, you know.
if the law is that they can't be relocated, they can't be relocated. And calling in a pest company to deal with things, you should go in with the understanding that they're not allowed to do things that you're not allowed to do in terms of relocation.
Yeah, in this case, I'm looking at it here. I think in this case, if you were a homeowner and you do not want the animal to be killed, and you had it, I think this is saying in an attic or another place. I mean, you could talk to that company and say, I want you to get the animal out of it, so scare it out or prevent it from returning. You'd want to clean that area, make sure that all the damage is done, and then prevent it from getting back in. And that animal would go find another place on its own. That is legal, and there are some companies that will do that. I mean, for example, like if you had a snake in your house, that would be something they would kind of have to do because they cannot relocate that animal. So it would come out, and then they'd find how it was getting in, and deal with that. And a lot of the attics have that too. I think there's special regulations on bats, I believe. So if you have bats or anything you think is protected, you know, a lot of these things, bats are incredibly important in the ecological environment. So if you have anything like that, you know, reach out, you know, again, to your help desk or to some of these other resources to help you too.
Yeah, and if you're still uncomfortable about dispatching wildlife or somebody doing it, wildlife does not fare better if it's moved somewhere else. It's they're out of their region and a lot of the times their space. I mean, you think about how far we travel to go to the grocery store and visit friends and family and go out to dinner, and it's so compressed for wildlife. They can't manage when you put them somewhere new. And a lot of times if they have something, then they're sick, they take it to that population too. And so it's not, you're not doing anybody any favors. That's one of several reasons why it's illegal. I also want to double down on recommendations. If you're on the help desk and you're getting a call about wildlife issues, beyond what's in the pest management guide, EMGs cannot give any further recommendations. From experience of getting those calls in my locality, you can be supportive of the caller by providing resources, i.e. the PMG and the helpline. A lot of times when people call, especially if you worked help desk a lot, you'll know this, they don't fully know the breadth of their issue when they call you. And so a lot of times they'll call, they're like, I have a deer problem. What can I do to keep deer out of my garden? And you can say, you know, okay, well, you can put up a deer fence. Well, I have a deer fence. Or if you say, well, you can, you know, get a hunting permit. You know, you might not know that they have a deer fence. So go through the checklist and say, like, what is exactly your situation? Are you in an HOA? How much property do you have? Are you live trapping mice? Like what are you doing? Are you feeding the deer on your own property that you're trying to exclude them from the garden? Like people do. And it's not necessarily when the caller comes in and gives you a call, it's not necessarily at the forefront of their mind things that they might be doing wrong, or that they might need to do more than one thing, or it might be some sort of effort. And a lot of times it's not at the forefront of their mind that there is a certain level of wildlife that they're going to have to accept on their property. Virginia has a lot of private land, and on private land, that is, I would say, unmanaged, as in like not hunted. There are lots and lots and lots of white-tailed deer. We live in an area where there is a lot of unmanaged private land, and we have enormous herds of white-tailed deer that come through. And anybody who's trying to garden fences, you have to. However, my neighbor feeds the deer and also gardens and doesn't understand where her plants are going. And that's a lack of education, and that education is something that we can help with as extension master gardeners. Is why is this happening? Why are there so many deer? If you have a problem with your deer, I know a college kid that can help you out with that. Like there's lots of different things that we can do to support the clients that call in while still adhering to the policy that we're sticking to the PMG when we give recommendations, but help them think through that. So by the time they call DWR, they have an actual question for DWR instead of going through that like 30-minute phone call with DWR, which clogs up their helpline, which helps them because state agencies are understaffed. So I think we have a bunch of resources to put up online. Angelette, I'm going to snag your resource list for our show notes. We have tons and tons of experts in extension to talk about this. We've got PhDs. Almost every ag agent has dealt with something. So if you can't figure something out or you don't know what to do, your ag agent is probably a good resource. They're ag and natural resources agents for a reason. We get the education. So I really appreciate Scott and Angelette and everybody for hopping on. Give Scott and Angelette a big round of applause. I think this is really helpful. And I'll see if I can find anything on snapping turtles. But just be aware if you've got a fish pond. before you soak your feet in the fish pond or something like that. We get some big snapping turtles in Virginia and some other perfectly fine, non-dangerous little turtles too. So snapping turtles are actually really cool ecologically. They're just not cool when they're on your patio. That's a send the dogs back in the house. Anything else from Angelette and Scott before we wrap up?
No, I wanted to thank you, Grace, and also just everybody out there doing the great work of the Extension Master Gardeners in all our counties. We can't do it without you. Thank you for all your work on the help desk, and always a pleasure to work in concert with the Master Gardeners. Thank you so much.
I would encourage you to talk to your neighbors too. I mean, I would have never considered Wiggleman until we had this conversation. It's gotten to be a joke in the office, but that joke ended up working very well in my situation. So, yeah, reach out. There are people out there that can help.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. See you for our next webinar.
Bye, y'all.